Betty, what is your backstory?
My real name is Elizabeth Ann, but so many Elizabeths are nicknamed Betty, and that's stuck with me all these years. As I grew up, I wanted to be an Elizabeth rather than a Betty, but it was too late. I was born in Salt Lake. My family lived in Pinedale, but there was not a doctor in Pinedale, so Mother had to go to Salt Lake to deliver, and I stayed there for a couple of weeks. Back in those days, women were in the hospital 2 weeks or so, having babies. Anyway, we got back to Pinedale as fast as we could, where we joined my dad. He and my mother met in Pinedale and married. Mother was from a little town down in Utah called Manti, and Dad was originally a Cody boy. Went to the university and then practiced in Cody for a while, but there were too many lawyers there and none in Pinedale, so he went to Pinedale. You understand, this was during the Depression. 1935 is when I was born, so it was right at the height of the Depression. Mother and Dad were both scrambling for whatever jobs they could find. Daddy was the prosecuting attorney there in that major crime. Not really. Pinedale was a wonderful place for them. Mother was a clerk of court, for which I'm very proud. My mother was a very strong woman. In any event, then the war came. We lived in Pinedale till I was 5 or 6. The war came and Dad was 4F. That meant that he was not eligible to join the service, but he decided to go to Hill Air Force Base down in Salt Lake, between Salt Lake and Ogden, and work as a civilian investigator for the Air Force. And that's what he did during the war. My mother worked down in Utah. We lived in a whole bunch of little towns. Housing was terribly tight, and so they scrambled to find places for us to live, and we moved to several little towns between Salt Lake and Ogden. Mother worked as a housing administrator. She was helping other people find homes. Finally, we moved into, not finally, but during one of those moves, we moved into Farmington. And we moved into a great big house. And it was a wonderful house for kids, all kinds of nooks and alcoves. We found out it had been a bootlegger during the Prohibition house, and so there were all kinds of places that he hid his liquor, apparently, and Susan and I were busy finding him, my younger sister, Susan, 3 years younger than I. Well, the house was so big that my mother's 2 sisters moved in with us, one of whom had a boy about our age, Sue and I, so we had kind of a brother. And my granddad, mother's dad, moved in, so we all lived together in the house. My father sort of prided himself because he thought that people thought we were a polygamous family because of all these women, and he, not true. That house burned down, which was a real tragedy for our family. So we had to split up, and we moved to another little town, Kaysville, down in Utah. And then finally the war was over for a couple of years, and Dad wanted to come back to Wyoming. Wyoming was home. By that time, Wyoming was Mother's home, too. She loved it. They both loved Pinedale. But at that time, there were no openings for lawyers in Pinedale. So Dad came up and explored around the state a little and came to Lander. Went into a partnership with a man by the name of George Dobler up in this orchard building. And they practiced together until the time of Mr. Dobler's death. That was when I was a 7th grader. So from that time on, we lived in Lander. And I graduated from FCVHS back in those days with the class of 53. Very proud of the class of 53. We still meet every month, those of us who live here. Anyway, yes, and they did an awesome thing for me at a later time in my life. But okay, so I graduated from high school, immediately went down to Laramie. During our time here in Lander, those years, my dad was sick, really sick. He couldn't get diagnosed. He had, as it turned out, he had a disease called Cushing's syndrome, which in those days was very difficult to diagnose. It's a disease of the adrenal glands that cause all kinds of different symptoms. So he had a really tough time. Mother was trying to hold our family together. When I went to school down in Laramie, I knew that I had to figure out some way to help because they didn't have the money to send me to school. And I did. I had some jobs down in Laramie, some of them very interesting. At one point, I called home because I'd seen an advertisement in the student newspaper, the Branding Iron, that they were looking for models in the art school. And I thought, I could do that. I have to do sit there. So I called home and talked to Dad. And he said, no, absolutely no. And I said, why not? It didn't occur to me that it was for nude models. I was really green and naive. Anyway, I got through school, graduated in 1959 from the law school, came home and practiced with Dad. That I still consider was one of the highlights of my life, that he and I got to practice together. But then I fell in love, and my husband, Max, and I went to Hawaii and were married in Hawaii and lived there for a year until some family things, we decided to come back to Lander. I was really glad that we came back because my dad didn't live very long after that. So died finally of this disease that he had and some of its side effects. Well, Mother, after Dad died, she had to make a living. He had been uninsurable for many, many years, and so she had to find a good job. And we persuaded her to apply for a job down in Cheyenne. This was as a deputy clerk of the Supreme Court, which was right up her alley. She had been clerk of court. She knew all about that. She'd even run for office here as clerk of court, but lost. But anyway, and her association with the law, she'd been my dad's secretary for years. So we finally talked her into trying for that job. I know you can imagine what effort it was for this newly widowed, middle-aged woman to leave family and friends and the home that she'd dreamed of and they finally built and go to Cheyenne, where she knew very few people, and take on a very responsible job. I took her down the day that she went down for the interview and the day that she finally moved down there. It was a tough go for her, but she was a very strong and brave woman. And she did it. She advanced then within a couple of years to be the clerk of the Supreme Court, not just deputy. Yes, I was so proud of her, I am proud of her, and loved her job, loved the judges. She even loved the prisoners over in Rawlins, who often would appeal their cases, and she would be the first one to see their appeals and give them hints. And it was really, she was really quite moved, because in her effects we have found letters from some of those men thanking her for being courteous and doing a good job. And she she really relished that. She did a fine job. The judges all were very pleased with her. So she stayed there. I was here practicing law. And then I got pregnant. And we were so excited. And then I miscarried. And that was a real down thing. We'd waited so long, and I just couldn't carry this baby. And so I was pretty discouraged and decided probably I would never be able to have children. 6 months later, I was pregnant again. This time it was clear sailing, and Jared was born. I wasn't practicing then. I stayed home and was a mother. I treasure those years when he was tiny, and we really had a good time together. And some bad times too. He was a very strong-willed child. Then Max and I, unfortunately, could not make a go of our marriage, something that I regret a lot. And so we were divorced, and I had to go back to work. This was when Jared was in the first grade. So I went back to work. I worked right half a block from where we're seated, down in the Gist firm. Worked with some great men down there. Heine Meyer, who had been in that firm when I'd practiced previously, and I were classmates and good friends. So I had a special affinity for that firm anyway. And I worked for them, I think for about, 3 or 4 years, something along in there. And then the county court system was established in Fremont County. We'd had the old JP system up until that time. And so I thought that might be, I'd had some experience as an alternate JP and as the municipal judge for the city of Lander, and I kind of liked that, and I thought, well, I might try that. So I expressed interest. You see, judges don't fill out job applications, they express interest.
Difference there.
So I filled out these, I expressed interest by filling out these papers. And send them to the committee. I don't know if you're aware of how judges are selected in Wyoming. Well, first you have to go through sort of a vetting process with a special commission that is appointed, laymen and lawyers and a judge or two. And they submit, they sift through the applications and have an interview process, and then they submit 3 names to the governor, and the governor makes that appointment. So Governor Herschler, astoundingly, I'm still shocked when I think of it, appointed me to be one of the 2. We had 2 county court judges at that time. The other judge was handicapped, and he was for Riverton, and we sort of joked that we were the governor's own personal anti-discrimination team. But anyway, a woman and a man who was in a chair. Anyway, we established the court. There were only 2 other county courts in Wyoming at that time, one in Casper and one in Cheyenne. So we went to those men and saw how they were doing it and set up our system and hired our staffs and got it go. It was a very challenging kind of a thing. And I worked at that job for 3 years. And then Judge Nicholas, who was our district court judge, retired. And I'd had some trial experience and more while I was on the bench, but I wasn't really sure that I was ready to try for the district court bench. But I filled out those same expression of interest papers just in case, and finally was persuaded to drop them in the mailbox. And lo and behold, I got that appointment. about 83. Yeah, I think so. So when I took office, went down to Cheyenne. Rob Dennert had been appointed to take my job as county court judge, and so he and I were sworn in, or robed, we call it, together down in Cheyenne. It was a great day. Lots of, because I was the first woman to hold a full-time, we've had women judges. Matter of fact, we were the first up on South Pass, as you know. So we've had women judges all in Wyoming for many, many years, but they were of the not full-time jobs. They were the minor, what's called minor court judges. And this was the first full-time appointment. So the governor was there, and a lot of the members of the bar, and other judges, and some federal folks. Anyway, it was a great big deal for me. But the biggest thing of all, they called me, I sat up with the 5 members of the Supreme Court, and I looked down, and there were 4 of my high school friends who had made the trip in January on horrible roads, traveled 300 miles for me, and that was really, really special for me. I just ran across Alice Gee, Lawrence Gee's wife, is a friend of mine and was a friend of Mother's. And her mother-in-law, Pearl Gee, when Pearl and Ivan were here, were good friends of our family. And Pearl had some of the ladies in our church tell their stories, kind of like I'm telling you. And she recorded it. And just this last year, Alice ran across that recording and sent it to me. I can't tell you what hearing that voice again felt like. One of the things she said was that day in Cheyenne when I was robed. She, by the way, robed me. She put the robe on. She said it was the proudest day of her life. And things like that mean a great deal. Mean even more to me as I'm getting older. She never really expressed that to me while she was alive. So it was a shock in addition to being so sentimental when I heard it. So that's what happened. I practiced, or I was on the bench, for 3 years in the county court, and then for 12 years, yeah, on the district court. And then I retired.
Tell me about your first job.
First job was working for Hendershots. I don't bet you've ever heard of Hendershots. It was a little tiny, sort of a very small clothing shop. Our customers were mostly Indian folks, and we sold beads. So my first job consisted of counting strings of beads, thousands of strings of beads. Mr. Hendershot shipped those around the country too, so we had to make sure there were a certain number of strings in each bundle and all. He was a very bright man, and I learned a great deal from him. I learned a great deal about retail trade and getting along with people. Mostly I enjoyed that job because I got to know some really wonderful Indian folks and I didn't before. This was when I was still in high school, so I really hadn't had much contact, and this was my first contact. Especially some of the old women would come in for their scarves that they wore on their heads, and I got acquainted, and I saw people use their thumbprint for signatures still, so I felt really happy about that. That was my first job.
So what inspired you to go to law school?
Well, my dad and mom. Mother loved the law too. She was a fine legal secretary, but not in the way one would think. My dad wasn't really sure whether he wanted women in the profession or not. And so he didn't really encourage me a lot. As a matter of fact, even when I was in undergraduate work, he was very low-key about it. It was only after I got in law school that I could see him getting excited, and then we talked about it and talked about classes I was taking. And so that's where it came from. That and the fact that when we were young, my friend Joni Crofts, her dad was a lawyer too. And Joni and I used to go down to the old courthouse, the old courthouse, and watch trials once in a while when we had trials around here. Got in some trouble over that because we wore the fad was one time that you had different colors hair, and we wore red. I wore red and green bangs, and the judge stopped the trial and called us up to the bench and bawled us out really well for appearing like that in his courtroom. But that's what really, I think, sparked it. And then, see, I didn't really realize there was anything unusual about that. Mother and Dad never let on that was an unusual thing for a girl to do. When I was in the 8th grade, we had a graduation ceremony. And we all stood up and said what we were going to be when we grew up. And I said I was going to be a lawyer. And everybody laughed. I will never forget that. I didn't understand it. And I couldn't figure out why they were laughing at me. So I went home and Mother, Dad, and I had a talk. And they told me why they were laughing and the fact that girls just didn't do that. And I never forgot that, and I resolved from that moment on that I was going to be a lawyer, period. I'd gone through my movie star phase and my airline stewardess. I wanted to be an airline attendant, stewardess then, but I grew too big and couldn't do that. Yeah. Didn't wear glasses, and so I was out on a lot of counts. So anyway, after the 8th grade, I never changed my mind. That was what I wanted to be.
Is there something about the law that fascinated you?
Yes. I really enjoyed the different aspects of life that the law covers. I didn't want a 9-to-5 job where you did the same thing every day. And I watched my dad do a criminal case one day and a civil dispute the next day and an adoption the next day. I thought that change, that variety was really what I was after.
What inspired you to become a judge?
Well, I'd had good experiences and some funny ones when I was the town judge, the municipal judge, and when I was an alternate JP.
Can you share some of those?
Well, yes. I'd like to find those old police officers. We used to have, over where the fire hall is now, there used to be a little courtroom. It was where the city council met, but we had it for a courtroom too. Mind you, mostly we dealt with drunks. And I'd go in, and the smell would be, really overwhelming on some occasions. And one of the things that our drunks drank was Thunderbird wine. I don't know if you've ever heard of Thunderbird. I got a bottle of it when I was robed. But anyway, one morning I went in, and it was particularly a bad smell. It was winter, and it was stifling heat in there, and afterwards, I had the habit of signing the orders from what I'd done after I got through with the session. And so the police officers were very kind, and they brought me coffee while I did that. Well, they weren't so kind that morning. They poured Thunderbird in the coffee and brought it, and I took a big swallow, and it made me sick all over. That was one of the funny things. I think ultimately it comes down to the feeling that you have a chance, just a chance, to make a difference in people's lives, a difference for the better. Not often does that happen, but when it does, it's a good feeling.
Can you recall any cases where you felt like you were making a difference?
I can, but I don't. We're not supposed to discuss things that might be hurtful to some people or be embarrassing or something of the sort. So I don't often do that. I did work out of town on occasion, and some I wouldn't. Well, you're widely published though. There were some that were really worthwhile, especially dealing with kids, than the juvenile court. And I still run into former adoptees who thank me, and people who were going through ugly custody battles and divorces, and they'll remind me. You see so many that you can't remember a lot of those, but every once in a while somebody, even to this day, will tell me that I made a difference in their life, and that's very fulfilling.
As a judge, what was your biggest challenge?
Oh, there were many. It's a very difficult job. The workload, for one thing, was such a surprise to me. I knew our judges worked hard, but I really didn't realize how hard. And I got caught up in that and made some mistakes in my life because of that. Like, I would work, usually I would take Saturday afternoon off, but work all day Sunday. So that my spiritual life, I was clear out of balance. And now, looking back, I know that I would have been a more efficient and probably a better judge had I been better balanced in my life. So that was one, was the workload. Then just the complexity of the human being, trying to sort through problems. Generally, except for adoptions, you don't handle very many fun things, very many pleasant things. You're working with people when they're troubled and when they're at their worst, and so dealing with the human condition was the real challenge.
What has been your greatest learning experience?
I know introspection is generally healthy, but sometimes I think as a society we take that way too far. I think one of the things that I've learned is that each experience that you have in life is valuable for its own experience, its own worth, but also to prepare you for something further. And I really felt blessed that when I was practicing law, for instance, I got to sit on the library board. Young lawyers often have those kinds of opportunities. They don't pay anything, but you get some experience. And I did. I learned about land acquisition, and I learned about a lot about book banning, in case that would ever come up. I learned about budgeting. Budgeting was a major part of my life when I was a judge. Thank heavens for Judy Ligursky and people that would help me with that. But so that experience just in itself, being on the library board, was really interesting. Plus I learned a lot and I was able to apply it later on. Max and I, before we got Jared, and while he was still little, we were foster parents. And that prepared me then for dealing with the foster system, and in the juvenile court. And so I learned from that experience. The nursing board was another thing I learned from being on the nursing board. And each of those experiences helped me in my later life. So my point being, hold yourself open to all the experiences that you can. That would be something that I really learned and try to stress to my younger friends.
Do you have any advice for career women who are also mothers?
I've watched Joanna, for instance, my own daughter-in-law, trying to be the best mother and the best wife and the best at her new business. It's beyond me. I couldn't have done it back then. I certainly couldn't do it now. So my hat's off to you, all you young mothers. I had a lot of help. Max was a really good father. It took both of us. And I'm so proud of Jared and all he's accomplished. Mostly I'm proud of the kind of father he's become.
Betty, what, if anything, are you afraid of?
Well, I think me, like most people who are my age, are not afraid of dying. We know that's going to happen. And most of us have made peace with our spiritual natures. What we're afraid of is the process and what, of becoming dependent on other people and of losing your body to disease of whatever kind. That's, I think, what I'm afraid of. If anybody can be objective and stand back and watch your body change, it's really quite interesting, because you can see and feel your organs are getting ready to die. Unfortunately, I only get rare glimpses of being able to be objective, but that's what I'm afraid of becoming a burden to Jared and Joe, and of not being able to enjoy my little girls growing up, my grandbabies.
What was your most difficult time?
The most difficult times are always, I think, interpersonal times, when I've lost my family members. Most recently, 2 years ago, my sister, my mother, my father, a beloved aunt. Those things are hard, of course. Death is always hard. The divorce was a very terrible time because of worry about Jared and how he would handle that. Those are the things that are the worst. I've been sick and had a little problem with a pacemaker that I had to I had a lung collapse, and I had to have a chest tube for several weeks, and that was miserable and scary. But it's the family. It's always about most everything comes down to family. And the older I get, the more I really realize that.
What do you consider your greatest accomplishment?
Jared He's been a really interesting child since he was born. He was, as I said, he was very stubborn, and I spanked him. I wouldn't, if I could do it all over again, I wouldn't do that. You know, we parents, you always think of the mistakes you made. You never remember the good things that you might have done. But no matter how I spanked him, he would just glare at me, Tough little kid. He was his own mind from the time he was just little. He made up his own mind about what he wanted to do. He, as he grew up, it was really interesting. He made up his mind about what kind of a student he wanted to be and why. He decided that early on that he would never use alcohol because it led to a loss of control, and he wanted to be in control of himself, as he's always been. But oh Lord, if he gets mad enough and gets out of control, look out. I've never seen him really out of control. His friends tell me that on occasion something has angered him enough that it causes a problem. He always made me proud. Never, because of the no alcohol thing, I didn't have to worry about that call at 3 o'clock in the morning. He was always the designated driver, had millions of friends. I mean, it didn't cause him any slowdown in his social life that I could see, either in high school or college. And I was so proud of him for that stand. It eased my life a lot, but I think it has helped his life. And then he married this girl that doesn't use alcohol either, so my life is pretty complete. Jared is a real thinker, and yet sometimes he reverts to a 2-year-old. I can see it. I think especially when he gets provoked with his own little girls. Yeah. But he's a wonderful man, has made me so proud of him, all the things that he does. For instance, we have fun. He takes me, I take that back. On alternate Wednesdays, he takes me to lunch. The other Wednesday, I take him to lunch. But we have lunch together every Wednesday, and which is really fun. Joanna comes with us sometimes, but I think it's really great of her, too, to give up some of her time for me, and it's really fun. We go to different places and discuss the world. We do have really good conversations, but he doesn't have time. He's so busy, and what time he does have, he mostly spends with his family, and I'm so glad for that.
Betty, what do you consider to be the most important of values?
Well, I think I already said family is, and I've hit on this too, spirituality, I think, is a really, whatever that might mean to a different person, I think everyone needs to be centered or balanced around some philosophy, for me it's my church, and I only regret the years that I was inactive and unbalanced, because I wasn't involved spiritually. And I had a longing, but I didn't really understand it, and now I think I do. It's hard after you've been away from a set of values, a set of beliefs. It's hard to go back, because you never feel quite worthy. But there are some very, very good people in my church who have laughed at me and said I was welcome no matter what, and now I find it very comforting to practice my beliefs.
What is your religion?
LDS.
Were you raised LDS?
Well, Lander was so small, and I got a really interesting life lesson over that. When we were living in Utah when I was little, and of course everybody was Mormons, and a Catholic kid came to our school. And we were all just horrified at that Catholic kid. We thought maybe he would grow horns any second, you know? Then we moved to Lander. And there was me and Susan, and the Gees, and the Yaks, and the Alexanders. That was about it. And all my friends at school, you're a what? They hadn't, some of them, even heard of a Mormon. So I got a really quick taste in anti-discrimination feelings.
Do you have any regrets?
Oh, sure. I regret not making a go of my marriage. That's the biggest regret I have in my life. Because no matter how necessary or how good a divorce is, it's hard on kids. And I think it hurt Jared. I think it took him a long time to make a commitment because of it. But on the other hand, it's made him a really good father. And I know he and Joanna would never do that to a child. At least I hope so.
Yeah.
Other regrets? Oh, no, not many.
Not really?
No. I used to think, oh, I should have made more money when I was practicing law. I should have made more of an effort to do that, and my life would be easier now. But I don't think so. I don't really have any regrets. Maybe some mistakes I've made along the way, representing people and not doing a good enough job and losing a case here and there. But
Tell me, were there times when you felt responsible for making a mistake?
every lawyer, whether they will admit it or not, who loses a case think, if I'd have just done thus and such or thus and such. Practicing law is a tough way to make a living.
Yeah.
My heart goes out to some the lawyers because I know how, and especially when when the recession hits and times get tough, practicing law is no easy matter.
So Betty, what do you think people say behind your back?
I don't know. I would hope that people would say that I'm a good person, that I was a good mother and grandmother.
Betty, is there anything that people would be surprised to know about you?
Most people, except for real old-timers, wouldn't know that I'm a good ice skater.
Really?
I was. Unfortunately, because of broken hip and one thing and another, I haven't ice skated for years and years, but I was a good skater and a water skier.
Wow.
Back in the olden days.
Tell me about that, like if you could just revisit maybe what you used to do for ice skating. Like were you a figure skater? Or
Yes.
Tell me about your skating.
I was a figure skater. We had some good figure skaters here in Lander. I don't know if you know Virgie Twitchell,
I don't.
the Badleys. They were good skaters. Bruce Badley was a jeweler here in town, and his family lived here for years and years. They had 3 kids, and 2 of the kids were in school with me, and they were really good skaters. So we didn't really have any lessons.
Mm-hmm.
We just sort of taught each other, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But we had fun. The old skating rink, it was right where it is now, basically. But there was an old warming house in there with a pot-bellied stove that had a rim around it. And every winter, one of us would go in and put our feet up on the stove, and it would snap a blade. It'd be that cold.
Oh, wow.
It happened to me. It happened to many people.
Wow.
I was a graceful skater. Entertained some thoughts of being an Olympic skater at one time, but that was when was right in the movie star kind of days. And we did waltzes and things like that. I didn't ever jump. I was too big. I couldn't figure out how to get all this body off the ice. But, you know, the camel backs and all of that. We had a wonderful time growing up in Lander. it was, there was never a thought about being afraid of anything or really anybody. We just, all the kids were doing about the same things, skating in the winter, swimming in the summer. We had a really nice way to grow up.
So Betty, tell me about water skiing.
That's how I met Max. I didn't know how to water ski very well, but he was a really good skier and a really good teacher, and he taught me how to water ski. And I had the grace that I was able to do that, and that was fun. Morton Lake and Ocean Lake and Boyson Lake, mostly. Louis Lake when we were feeling really brave.
So Betty, what's next?
Watching my granddaughters. I went to the 2nd grade Christmas program night before last. And it's so much fun for me to watch the little kids doing all the things the same way that little kids, the same excitement, the same looks on their faces, the same twirling of dresses, and all those things. And watching my little one, I have one in the 2nd grade, and she was just wonderful the other night. So she was so proud and so happy. Then they came over. They came over on Mondays and Wednesdays. They come to my house after school. Early out on Wednesdays. Yeah. So they're there for a while. And so after they finished their homework, I asked if they'd like to help me decorate my house for Christmas. Big mistake. I had visions of, beautifully decorated. Well, the tinsel is, it's a mess, but it's going to stay that way through Christmas. That's pretty special. Great joy, great joy. My whole family, Joe and Jared, are so good to me.
What can you share about your sister?
My sister's who you should be writing about. She was the brave one and the courageous one in our family. But Susan was an ethereal sort of a personality. She loved fairies and angels, and she was a really good dancer. Ballet. When she was 16, she developed epilepsy, which we didn't really know for a while. It took a while to get her diagnosed. But when you're 16 and find out you can't drive and your seizures are out of control and you have to go to school and you go to a swimming party and they have to pull you out because you've had a seizure in the pool, and all of those things were so, they were hard for her, but she was so courageous. She got married too young, had a baby too young. When he was born, for instance, she and her husband were living out at Jeffrey City in a travel trailer. She couldn't carry this baby because she might have a seizure. So the baby had to be in a baby buggy whenever she moved him. But times for her were tough, but she made it. She raised a wonderful boy who's now a middle-aged man. And she lived her life. She went down, she decided she and my mother and I were living together here in Lander. And her boy had gone to school, and so she decided to go to Las Vegas. She had 2 girlfriends down there, but she didn't have a job. She didn't have an apartment. She didn't have anything. And she can't drive, of course. She has to walk every place because of the seizure. So she went to Las Vegas and had a wonderful time, enjoyed it. Only came home because I asked her to come and help me care for our mother. And then she stayed with me after Mother died. And Well, you know how it is to go home from work and have dinner ready. It was just heaven. And the house was clean. It was just wonderful. She was good to me. But I've always admired her so much because she didn't let her illness stop her. She was a member of Eastern Star and was, as a matter of fact, worthy matron of Eastern Star here in Lander. And she loved Star, and they were so nice to her, so good to her. You know, rides and all the things that good people do. My sister was a brave woman and courageous. She really was.
So what's this about you being a baton twirler?
Jared.
Can you tell me about that?
Well, yes, of course. When we were real little down in Utah, we took dance lessons. And as a part of the dance lesson, our teacher taught us to twirl a little bit, a couple of moves. So we came up here, and we were the only ones in Lander that did it. So that set us, you know, that set us up right then. We could do something nobody else could do. So we learned, I really don't know how we learned some of the things we learned, because there was no teacher here. As a matter of fact, we ended up teaching many of the girls in town how to twirl the baton. I'm teaching my little granddaughters this. But it really opened some doors for me. Again, those experiences I was in the band here. I twirled. Just go out, and there are all kinds of different moves. You throw it up in the air, and you catch it behind your back, and you put it under your leg and around your waist. And so that was fun, but you had to play something. So Mr. Alexander taught me how to play the timpani drums. So I was a timpanist. So then I went to Laramie, and some of the girls from Lander told the sorority that I had pledged that I could twirl, and they made me. They insisted that I go try out. I wouldn't have ever done it on my own. I was too shy. But I went to try out and got to be a majorette for university, which meant that I got to travel with the football and the basketball teams to you know, out-of-town games, got to know a lot of people, and got generally more self-assured, so that when I got into law school, it wasn't quite I wasn't quite the shy one that I had been.
So you attended Wyoming Law School in the 1950s. Were you one of the only women in the law school at that time?
Yes. There are 3 classes in law school, and there was a girl ahead of me and Netta Bell. Do you know Netta Bell Gerard from Riverton? She was in the class behind me. So we had all 3 classes covered. There was Leslie in front, and then me, and then Netta Bell. Well, I can safely say now that some of those men are my lifelong friends. Harold Meyer, Heine Meyer, for instance. Then we were all just trying to stay alive in law school. We didn't know what we were doing, and it was altogether a different experience for us. They found out I could type. That was a bad mistake that I made, because then they wanted me to type their stuff, and so I had a little battle over that. They were good to me for the most part. They teased, and it was sometimes the teasing got to be, you know how sometimes it's a bore, and yet you have to go along with it, so no use getting upset about it. We had a law professor. He was the dearest man. John Rames was his name, bless his soul. He taught us criminal law when we were freshmen, first-year law students. And every rape case or incest case or anything of a sexual nature, he would call on me to brief. Now, Nowadays, I think young women would find that offensive. In those days, number one, I knew that he was a really nice man. What he was doing was trying to toughen me up. He knew that when I got out of law school, I was going to have to deal with that kind of ugliness, and I better learn how to deal with it.
Yeah.
So he was really doing me a favor. So there were some experiences like that that I learned. I used to hate the dean. Dean Hamilton was his name. And when I was an undergraduate, I had to get him to approve my class schedule for the next quarter. We were on the quarter system then. So 4 times a year I had to go in to see Dean Hamilton to get his signature on my class schedule. 4 times a year he would say, I don't see any home ec courses on there, or I don't see any education courses. And it would be a fight every time, and I would tell him I'm not taking them. I don't have time to take those. And he'd say, oh, you're going to have all the time in the world, like you're never going to make it through law school. Looking back, I don't know. The dean wasn't an ugly man. I think maybe he was trying to keep me motivated too. It worked. I'd get so angry with him. I really stood my ground, fought with him. He'd end up signing it, reluctantly, but signing it. So I wouldn't have taken a home ec course. Now I really regret that. I'd really like to know how to cook and sew and do some things.
Was it exciting to be one of the first women to attend Wyoming's law school?
When I was an undergraduate, nobody paid any attention because they figured my plans would change, I think. After I got in law school, then it was fun. I did run for office university-wide. I ran for the vice president of the governing body for the university, and I lost. And that really soured me on politics. So I wasn't particularly interested in the law because of politics. Didn't like running for office.
So Betty, tell me, what does a judge do?
A judge is to listen to each side and try to apply the facts, not equally. You've got the law that you contend with, and the law says this, so this side wins. That's why mediation is good in a lot of those cases, because it's not a one side wins all and one side loses all. You can kind of meet in the middle, but when it goes to trial, somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose. We do have judges, and I think I was accused of it, I'm not sure, on occasion, who try to split the baby and try to make everybody happy. Well, you can't do it. There were some really interesting experiences, some really fun experiences too. I can't help but thinking of a case up in Cody, one of Bill Simpson's cases. He's another brother in the Simpson clan, and he was a public defender then. He was representing this little Mexican guy who was from Mexico, and I'm sure here illegally. I don't know what he was doing in Cody exactly, but he managed to make himself very unpopular because he went into a laundromat and put some poor lady in there, got the full benefit of his attention, to the point where she called the police. So he put up a bond, and I don't know how I got there. I worked up in Cody for quite a while. There was a judge who was sick up there, and I substituted for him for quite a few cases. And somehow I got hold of this case. It was just a misdemeanor case, but it was so funny because the kid had put up a bond so he could get out of jail. I think it was $300. So I knew that there was $300 there, laying there, that I could find him. I wasn't going to keep him in jail. He didn't do anything that bad. But I wanted him to understand that we didn't operate like that in this country. So I fined him most of the $300. I don't remember exactly. And he started bargaining with me, because you know how I guess people in Mexico bargain things a lot. And he's saying $250. I'm saying, No, you don't understand. So Bill Simpson, who is a great, big, tall guy, he's trying to stand in front of this guy so the guy can't, and the guy is peeking around Bill. Was one of the fun. It was a right. My court reporter was in stitches, so was I. And then we had a case, so it wasn't a very nice case, but we had a very interesting case. A young man whose family was from South Korea was accused of almost killing a highway patrolman. The young man was sick. He was mentally very ill. So we were having this hearing, and the family came over from South Korea, and the defense had called them as witnesses for this boy, and so there were some cultural problems. They would get up to where the witnesses were supposed to sit, and they'd bow. And finally it dawned on me, I had to bow back before they'd sit down. So we're bowing to each other in the court. It was a riot. And then one of them turned out to be, and very proud of it, a chicken sexer. I bet you didn't ever heard of that before. Well, neither did I, but he explained it in great detail. It's a person who can tell the sex of a chicken. It's not easy to tell the sex of a chicken, and you have to have special training to determine if it's a boy or a girl chicken. He explained the whole thing in more detail than I ever wanted to know.
You're in the courtroom?
Right? Oh yes, oh yes. There was no way to get him stopped, you know,
Yeah.
without being.
It's hilarious.
It was funny. In the meantime, the kid, the defendant, who is sick, is mentally sick. He's sitting at the counsel table, and he's imitating the court reporter. So everything that Keith did,
What a ride.
oh, there have been some really funny things like that.
Betty, what was special about practicing law with your father?
Oh, just that I got to see a different side of him, that not just as a daughter, but as a colleague, and we would argue about stuff, and he would take me. He was a deputy county attorney at that time, so the first county commissioners meeting I went with him to, and he had this big yellow pad, and he's writing and writing and writing. What is he doing? Because I didn't think anything was going on that warranted all that attention. So after we got through, he showed me his yellow pad, and he just doodled all over it, you know, little stars and circles, but it looked like he was really busy.
Were there other judges and attorneys that you admired?
Yes. Of course, Jack Nicholas, that I practiced under, I really learned from him. Bob Brank was such a different personality, and conducted, all judges are different, so they conduct their courtrooms differently, and I learned from him. Ken Ham was an inspiration over in Rock Springs. Many of the judges, and they were so good to me. The day after the governor had called me with the appointment, in the mail I got a bench book. That's a how-to book for judges from Judge Ham. He'd very thoughtfully dropped that in the mail as soon as he'd heard. And you would think that some of those old guys would really have resented a woman, you know, coming to their meetings and all. Instead of that, they were just wonderful. They never presumed. Judges don't say, when you call somebody, you say, I've got a case here I'd like your thoughts on. They don't tell you what to do, but they say, well, things like, well, I had one like that once, and this is what I did, you know. Very careful not to overstep any bounds, but very good men, everyone that I worked with in Wyoming. Wyoming is so fortunate because we're so small that we all know each other, and so we know what the reputation. You know, when I was telling you about how you get to be a judge, I didn't tell you that after you get the appointment, you have to stand for election after that. And then your appointment is for a term of 3 years, and then every 3 years you what's called stand for retention.
Okay.
And if the voters don't think you've done a good job, then they can vote you out. And that has happened several times, both at the Supreme Court level and at our district court level and the county court level. You sort of worried every time you had a rustling case, because every rancher in the entire state would appear in your courtroom. There could be a first-degree homicide, and nobody would show up in the courtroom, but boy, let somebody steal a cow, and that was serious. No, you can't let public opinion or the worry about an election affect the way you do your job. I think sometimes judges got defeated unfairly. I think Judge Rogers, a judge from up in Jackson, got defeated unfairly. And I was very sad about how that happened. The lawyers also who've appeared before you have the chance through a poll that's conducted by the Bar Association to say how they feel, what kind of a job they feel you've done. And then that's published.
Okay.
So the electorate has a chance to know what the lawyers anyway think of judges.
Do you have any hobbies?
Oh, I like to read. That's, you never have enough time when you're working to read, and I read a great deal. I read anything.
Yeah.
And everything I can get my hands on. So I just finished a book on Islam that was kind of interesting, and I read political stuff.
Do you have a favorite book?
No.
I know there's so many.
There's just too many. Of course, the Bible and other Book of Mormon for me are very favorite books. But Jared and I both last year reread Atlas Shrugged, and we both enjoyed that again. Fountainhead is good too, that she wrote, but probably Atlas Shrugged is a lot better.
So Betty, share with me your views on society and America.
Strong feelings on most everything, sometimes too strong.
And share them with me if you wouldn't mind.
Well, as for one of my pet peeves with society today is the coarsening or the cheapening of our standards. And I see so many young women wearing clothing that's inappropriate, using language that's inappropriate, both young women and young men. And I feel sad. I feel it's a great loss when we allow ourselves to become so coarsened that no longer are we progressing towards civilization. We're setting civilization back, in my opinion. And I watch television, and it just makes me sad. Last night, contrast. Last night I watched the public television station that had a broadcast of the New York City Ballet for the Christmas program, the Nutcracker. And it was so beautiful and so uplifting. And I thought, oh, we so badly need more uplifting things, uplifting ways of thinking about people, and instead of the degrading kind of things that I see go on.
What do you think is the cause?
I think a breakdown of the family is one. I really think that's happened. Also, oh dear, you young women are going to slay me, but I think the sexual revolution was a problem, caused a problem for society.
Can you expound on that?
Just that it seemed to me that we went so overboard during those times, what with burning our bras and all the nonsense, that we let something go, that many of us let things go that we shouldn't have. We are women, and we while we are strong women and healthy women, we're also loving women and nice women. I remember telling the graduates I spoke at commencement down in Laramie to the law school a few years ago, and I remember trying to stress to the young women attorneys that it isn't necessary to be ugly and aggressive and be like the man. You can be assertive and you can be a good lawyer without doing all that, and that's what I try to stress. That's what I'd like to be able to help teach my granddaughters too.
So Betty, what advice would you give your granddaughters?
To listen to their folks, because their folks are really good examples of how I feel. I don't hear them using language that is objectionable. They don't degrade each other in front of other people. They would never do that. They don't. They just try to conduct themselves. They try to treat each other as they'd like to be treated, golden rule. And that's what I'd like to teach my granddaughters, to be strong, healthy women, but be women.
So Betty, you're 76 years old. You've lived. You've accomplished so much. Tell me, what matters most?
Family. I think it's just the key to human existence, really. And that's because it's about love and treating each other well, thus having the ability to treat other people well. That doesn't mean that I'm opposed to career women. Obviously, I'm not.
Yeah.
But families come first. For career men, families come first. And I think that it's wise not to forget why we're working, to make time, to have enough money to take care of our families.
Tell me about your time as a University of Wyoming trustee.
Yes, that was one of the great experiences. I really enjoyed that. That's purely a political appointment. And Governor Sullivan, bless his heart, came to visit Lander one day. And usually people that come to visit stop down the courthouse just as a courtesy kind of thing. So I was out in the hall talking to him, and finally I had to get back to work, and I kind of excused myself, and he said, "Wait a minute, I came to talk to you." And that's the first I'd known. So I didn't know there was a vacancy on the board, and it has to be balanced. So many Republicans and so many Democrats and so many from geographic districts, and I forget how it all goes now, but it's all supposed to be balanced out. Well, he asked me if I would want that, so I said yes, not really knowing if I would or not, but I sure did. And then you start to work, and I'm not kidding you, it's work. They would, before every meeting, there would be a stack come just like that of stuff that you had to familiarize yourself with, or you were lost during the board meetings. And now all of us have such egos that we couldn't stand to think we would be lost, you know. But I was on the budget committee a couple times and on the athletic committee. Finally got to be president, and that was interesting. That was more just ceremonial than anything. Got to go see all kinds of interesting groups and people. I enjoyed the experience, except driving down to Laramie was, in the winter, well, you know how it is. And it got to be just too much. I just got tired of it. I learned, that's what I took out of that experience. I learned so much about the running of a huge institution. And it took a culmination of all the other experiences that I've had. Talk about budgeting problems. I learned about that kind of thing. But I hadn't known much about the world of academia, and it was very fascinating to see how that world operates. I used to think the law was a slow process. Boy, academics, that's really slow.
Really?
To turn an institution around, why, reminds me of trying to turn a huge ship around. It's a challenge. I suspect because you have so many bright minds that everybody's, everybody's not jockeying for position exactly, but wanting to be heard. And so I did learn a lot about athletics. I can't imagine why I got appointed to, but I was on the athletics committee for a while.
Like the UW.
So I got to stand down on the sidelines with the football players, which didn't seem to me to be any great perk, but of course, when the plays would move my way, I could just get behind one of those great big guys and knew I'd be okay. But I learned some of what we expect of student athletes, and it's too much. I learned some negative things about that no matter how much money you pour into an athletics program, it's never enough, because somebody next door is going to put more money into it, and in order to keep up, you've got to put more money. It's foolishness. It's foolishness. We've let the athletics programs get clear out of control at these universities, and I don't know how to stop it. The NCAA can't do it, so I doubt that I could. But I really didn't understand all those things until I actually would sit down and talk with student athletes and find out the demands of their time. Then I had a grand niece, one of Susie's granddaughters, was a student athlete, a really good basketball player and golfer. And she was on a double scholarship to Dickinson, North Dakota. And so I know what she went through from my experience there, and so I was able to help her a little bit. We turn out those folks like gladiators for us and sit there and enjoy the benefits, and they're trying to study and be real students as well as athletes, and it's not working, I don't think.
What does Lander and Wyoming mean to you?
I'll tell you, I was down in the Phoenix area for Christmas or for Thanksgiving, and some short-tail relatives down there were showing me places that I could buy down there. And I was trying to be nice, but all I could think of was, I want to go home. This is my home. My roots are deep. I love this little town for what it offers me, what it has done for me and my family, what it offers to my granddaughters, and the thought of I would never leave Lander. Unless maybe Jared and Joe would move, then I might consider it. But for right now, I really appreciate the kind of background that I have from living in this little town. Growing up knowing all different kinds of kids. As close as I know of to a classless kind of society around here. That's one of the things that I really like. And one of the things that I want my granddaughters to learn, that there are nice people, whatever their walk of life, however much money they've got or don't have, all that kind of nonsense. I want them to learn what real values are. And that I think this town and its culture taught me. And when as I said at the outset of our talk, when I looked down and saw those high school friends sitting in the middle of that group down in Cheyenne, I was that's the kind of thing I love about our country.
What about our country?
I'm very afraid for our country, really afraid. For the first time, everybody says, oh, this election is so important and all. But I really do believe, from reading mostly, that our president is not the kind of man that I want leading our country, that I think he does not believe in a capitalist form of government, that I think he would much rather that we would be socialists, and that I think he's working hard toward that end, and that I think he's winning. If you read, for instance, that Alinsky, I don't know if you, Saul Alinsky is his name, and he was the original community organizer. And it gives a one-by-one, step-by-step how-to of how to destroy a country through its economic system. And to read Saul Alinsky and see and know that that our president was terribly influenced by him and by that creep Moyer, Bill Ayers. I know he was heavily influenced by those people, and I don't like that, especially for a man who holds himself out to be a constitutional lawyer. I'm really worried for our country. If the election were today, I'd feel more confident. I'm worried that this is going to sound silly, I'm worried that we'll see a slight recovery, just enough to give people the trust, allow them to misplace their trust in the Obama system. Mm-hmm. And then he'll get reelected. That's what I'm worried about. One of the things I'm worried about. Primarily what's going to happen to my beloved country.
What are you afraid is going to happen to our country?
I'm afraid that the people that who are out crying on the streets now are going to become more powerful. We're going to become more and more a nation of dependent people who will, like some of us old folks, not give up 1 penny of our Social Security and all of this sort of thing. We're going to become a nation of takers, and the givers are going to become fewer and fewer, and pretty soon there's going to be nothing left to give. So we're going to turn out to have the problems that Greece and Spain and Italy and the rest of Europe does. I hope not. That's my concern.
What about your mother? What was her role in your life?
When she was 12, her mother died. She had a whole bunch of older brothers and sisters, 7 or 8, and one younger sister who was 8. Mother was 12 and Lenore was 8. Their mother died, and their father was a traveling man. He'd show up once in a while, but they were really basically left on their own. Mother raised the 8-year-old Aunt Lenore. I mean, really raised her. They lived in this crummy little town down in Utah, and she'd plant a garden, and she tells a funny story about she didn't like to wash clothes. So when Lenore would run out of panties, why, she'd grab a flour sack and make a pair of pants for her. She didn't mind sewing, but she hated to wash. So her mother had promised her that she could go to college. Well, then her mother died, and her dad disappeared, and Mother knew she could never go to college. So she worked very hard, got through high school, got Lenore situated with another older sister, and took herself to business college in Salt Lake. She lived with one of the teachers there and his family, and got board and room in return for being their babysitter and housekeeper. She had 2 dresses that she wore on alternate days to school. She went to the business college for 1.5 years, and they found her the job up in Pinedale, working for a lawyer up there where she went and then met my dad.
What year would that have been?
They were married in 1932, So it was probably 1930 or 31 when she went to Pinedale. Yeah, and she got a car, I forget, but it was a Model, not a Model A, a Model A or a Model T. But you know the Pinedale weather, when she'd go down to Utah to see her family, she'd have to put rocks in the bottom of the car to keep her feet from, there was no such thing as a heater or anything in those cars those days. But she made it.
So what do you mean rocks?
Hot rocks.
She'd eat rocks and then put them by her feet?
Mm-hmm. So her feet wouldn't freeze, so she could maneuver the pedals.
So good, don't we?
Do we ever? But they loved Pinedale. They talked about the parties out on the lake and one thing and another. And then they moved to Utah, and she worked. As I say, she was a housing specialist. And then they moved here, and life looked, I'm sure, I didn't know it, I was young, but I'm sure she thought life might be a little easier because Dad was going to have a law business and she could maybe take it. Well, then he got sick. So then she really went to work. And I know that sometimes there was no money. She would support us with notarial commissions. She'd get 50 cents every time she notarized somebody's paper. I don't know how she did it. I know that she would work, they kept their office open, she and Mr. Dober did, until noon on Saturdays. Then she'd come home and try to get our house cleaned and fight with me, and we were so bad, fight with Susie and I, try to get us to hell. Then on Sunday she'd go down and wax the office and all of that kind of thing. And that she held down other jobs too, bookkeeping and anything to keep a family going when Dad was so sick. And then when she went to Cheyenne and got that job, that was when she sort of blossomed, because her life was better then. She had a good job and one that she loved, and everything was much better for her. But as I said, never once did I get from my mother that I couldn't be a lawyer or do anything else that I wanted to. Might be rough financially, no question, but not that I couldn't do it, you know. And her sister, the 8-year-old, my beloved Aunt Lenore, was the same thing. She was the secretary to some generals and things during the war years, and then she was in California and she married out there, but she was a big wheel in the health department out there, secretarial side of it. And they were both, you know, women that were my role models, that I grew up with, watching them work and knowing what it was all about. I owe a lot to them. And other people that I am indebted to. I owe a lot to some of the bra burners, the women who were involved in the feminist movement. I wasn't. I was busy doing other things, but I think I got that first appointment because of their work. So I owe something to the feminists. I owe a lot to my country and my state, my town, and my university. Oh, we are all so blessed, so very blessed to live in this land of opportunity. We all ought to be down on our hands and knees thanking God every day that we are living here. Never was I more sure that when I made a couple of trips to China with some university folks, and I saw how the people, not in the cities were just barely getting started at their big boom that's going on now when I was there. But out in the rural areas where we were, I saw how people were living and how much we have. The poorest of us have so much more than those folks did. I saw people out trying to chop frozen ground with hand tools because that was their method of cultivating. I saw people sweeping roads with brooms because they didn't have any snow clearing equipment. So they'd go out and try to sweep the snow off with. I sat in a courtroom and watched a young man get convicted of murder in 2 hours in a trial that was just so horrifying that we were all just shocked. We had an interpreter who was, or a translator who was translating for us. Interpreting. Translating is documents and interpreting is oral.
Okay.
And it was such a shock to watch how we never had a chance. There are 3 judges, one of whom is a party member and who can overrule the other 2 judges anytime he wants. So when I think of all those things, I think how wonderful this
Do we take
country
it for
is.
granted?
We obviously.